One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. Sometimes the person everyone blames is the only person telling the truth. The crystal chandeliers of the Whitmore Grand Hotel scattered golden light across the ballroom as New York's elite raised champagne glasses and celebrated what many were calling the engagement of the year. Laughter floated through the air. Expensive watches flashed beneath tailored sleeves. A string quartet played softly near the marble staircase. Everything looked perfect, and that was exactly how Victoria Hale wanted it. Standing beside a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Manhattan, Victoria smiled for photographs as guests admired the enormous diamond ring sparkling on her hand. The stone seemed to catch every beam of light in the room. It was impossible not to notice it. Impossible not to talk about it. 10 carats, one guest whispered. Maybe more. Grayson Whitmore certainly knows how to make a statement. Across the ballroom, Grayson Whitmore offered a polite smile while shaking hands with investors and politicians. At 38, the billionaire founder of Whitmore Capital had built a reputation for discipline, intelligence, and calm leadership. Tonight, however, he looked less like a businessman and more like a man simply trying to survive his own engagement party. Smile, one board member joked. You look like you're negotiating a merger. Grayson chuckled quietly. Old habits. Nearby, Evelyn Hart moved carefully through the crowd carrying a silver tray of sparkling water. She kept her eyes down, her pace steady, and her expression professional. Most guests never looked twice at her. To them, she was just another waitress. Invisible, replaceable, easy to overlook, which was exactly how Evelyn preferred it. Table 12 needs refills, another server whispered as she passed. Got it, Evelyn replied softly. Her voice was calm, always calm, even when the ballroom felt overwhelming, even when hundreds of wealthy strangers filled every corner of the room. She adjusted the tray and continued moving through the crowd. Then she noticed something strange. Victoria had stepped away from a group of guests and was heading toward a private hallway near the ballroom entrance. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Victoria's smile disappeared. It lasted less than a second. Then it returned. Bright. Perfect. Practiced. Evelyn frowned slightly before continuing toward table 12. The moment felt odd, but she quickly dismissed it. Rich people did strange things all the time. 20 minutes later, dessert service began. The atmosphere grew even more relaxed. Guests mingled. The quartet shifted into a slower melody. A few people gathered around Victoria to admire her engagement ring once again. You must be terrified walking around with that thing, someone joked. Victoria laughed. Honestly, I haven't taken my eyes off it all night. Then her expression froze. The smile vanished. Her eyes widened. Wait. The conversation stopped. What's wrong? Someone asked. Victoria stared at her hand. Suddenly her face turned pale. My ring. The room grew quiet. My ring is gone. The words seemed to travel through the ballroom like an electric current. Conversations died instantly. Music stopped. Heads turned from every direction. What do you mean gone? One guest asked. Victoria's breathing quickened. The diamond. Her voice cracked. The diamond is missing. Gasps echoed around the room. Guests rushed closer. Grayson immediately crossed the ballroom. Victoria. His tone remained calm. Take a breath. She grabbed his arm. It's gone, Grayson. Panic filled her eyes. Someone stole it. Security personnel appeared almost immediately. Hotel staff exchanged nervous looks. Guests began whispering among themselves. Then Victoria slowly turned her head. Her gaze settled on someone standing only a few feet away. Evelyn. It was her. Silence. Complete silence. Evelyn blinked. Excuse me. Victoria pointed directly at her. She was near me all evening. Every eye in the ballroom shifted toward the waitress holding a tray of untouched glasses. Ma'am, Evelyn said carefully. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Really? Victoria snapped. Because you bumped into me near the hallway. Evelyn's heart skipped. She remembered passing her. Barely. That was an accident, Evelyn said quietly. I never touched your ring. Several guests exchanged suspicious glances. One security guard stepped forward. Miss, we'll need to ask a few questions. Evelyn felt hundreds of eyes watching her, recording her, judging her. Yet her voice remained steady. I didn't take anything. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Then why is my diamond missing? The ballroom held its breath. Security requested permission to inspect staff belongings. One by one, servers complied. Evelyn did the same. Calmly, silently, until a guard reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small velvet pouch. The room erupted. The guard opened it. Inside sat a brilliant diamond reflecting the ballroom lights. Gasps echoed everywhere. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Grayson stared at the stone. Victoria covered her mouth dramatically. "I knew it," she whispered. Evelyn looked at the diamond, then at the pouch, then at the crowd. Her pulse raced for the first time all evening, because she had never seen that pouch before in her life. And yet somehow it had appeared in her pocket. The guard held the diamond up for everyone to see. Cameras emerged. Phones recorded. Guests whispered. Judged. Condemned. But while everyone else stared at the gem, Evelyn stared at something else. The diamond itself. And for the briefest moment, something unexpected flickered across her face. Not fear. Not panic. Recognition. Then she looked directly at Victoria and said the last thing anyone expected to hear. "That's strange." The entire ballroom fell silent. Victoria frowned. "What is?" Evelyn's voice remained soft, calm, almost curious. "Because if that's your diamond," she said, "then we have a much bigger problem than theft." For several long seconds, nobody moved. The ballroom seemed frozen beneath the chandelier light. Evelyn stood surrounded by security guards, wealthy guests, and dozens of phones pointed in her direction. Victoria's expression hardened. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" she asked. Evelyn looked at the diamond again. Her breathing remained steady. Her posture remained calm. The reaction only irritated Victoria more. Most people accused of theft would be crying by now, defending themselves, begging to be believed. Evelyn did neither. "Miss Hart," one security supervisor said carefully, "this is not the time for games." "I agree," Evelyn replied, "which is why I am confused." The supervisor frowned. Confused about what? Evelyn slowly shifted her gaze from the diamond to Victoria. "About why someone would hide that stone in my apron." The crowd erupted into whispers. Victoria immediately stepped forward. "That is ridiculous." "Maybe," Evelyn said quietly, "but I know one thing." Her eyes returned to the gem. "That stone does not belong to me." Victoria laughed sharply. "We literally found it in your pocket." Several guests nodded. To them, the case looked obvious. The evidence seemed undeniable. Grayson watched silently from several feet away. He should have been furious. Instead, something felt wrong. He could not explain it. He had spent 20 years building businesses and evaluating people. He trusted instincts. And his instincts were telling him that the woman standing in front of him looked far more surprised than guilty. "Evelyn," Grayson finally said. His voice was calm but firm. "If there is something you need to explain, now would be the time." Every eye turned toward her. The room waited. Evelyn met his gaze. For the first time all evening, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not anger. Not condemnation. Uncertainty. "I cannot explain how that pouch appeared in my apron," she said. "Because I do not know." Victoria scoffed loudly. "Convenient answer. It happens to be the truth." Victoria's face reddened. "You expect anyone here to believe that?" Evelyn looked around the ballroom. Wealth. Influence. Power. None of it mattered right now. She was alone. Completely alone. Yet her voice never wavered. "No," she admitted. "I do not." The honesty surprised everyone. Even Grayson. "Then what exactly are you saying?" Victoria demanded. Evelyn hesitated briefly. "I am saying that if somebody truly wanted to steal a 10-carat diamond worth millions of dollars, they probably would not leave it sitting inside a waitress's apron pocket where security could find it in less than 5 minutes. Several guests exchanged glances. The logic was uncomfortable. Victoria immediately interrupted. "You panicked. You made a mistake." "Perhaps." Evelyn nodded. "Or perhaps someone wanted security to find it." Silence followed. The accusation floated through the room without directly naming anyone. Victoria's jaw tightened. "This is unbelievable." The security supervisor stepped forward again. "Miss Hart, regardless of your explanation, hotel policy requires us to remove you from the event until the investigation is complete." Evelyn nodded. "I understand." The simplicity of her response caught everyone off guard. No argument. No scene. No tears. She simply accepted it. A few moments later, she removed her staff badge and placed it carefully on a nearby table. Her hands trembled slightly. Only slightly. Then she picked up her purse. Before leaving, She looked once more at the diamond. Something about it continued bothering her. Something she could not ignore. Victoria noticed the look immediately. Stop staring at it. Evelyn looked back at her. Why? Victoria folded her arms. Because it is mine. For the briefest second, Evelyn almost smiled. Not because she found anything amusing. Because she suddenly became certain of something. Not a theory. Not a suspicion. A certainty. Then she quietly turned toward the exit. Grayson watched her walk away through the ballroom. The crowd parted as she passed. Some stared with pity. Others with judgment. Most assumed they would never see her again. But just before Evelyn reached the doors, she stopped. She turned back toward Grayson. The billionaire met her gaze across the room. Mr. Whitmore, she said softly. Sooner or later, someone will ask a very important question. The room fell silent again. What question? Grayson asked. Evelyn looked toward the diamond one final time. Then she answered, whether that stone was ever real to begin with. And with that, she walked out into the cold Manhattan night, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked guests and one billionaire who suddenly found himself questioning everything he thought he had just witnessed. The November wind swept through Midtown as Evelyn Hart stepped out of the subway station and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had been serving sparkling water beneath crystal chandeliers. Now she was carrying a cardboard box filled with the few personal items from her locker. A coffee mug, a notebook, 2 framed photographs of her mother. The contrast would have felt cruel if she had not spent most of her life adapting to disappointment. Her phone buzzed. Another news alert. Another article. Another photograph from the gala. She did not open it. She already knew what it would say. Waitress accused of diamond theft at Billionaire's engagement party. The internet had already made its decision. The truth had not even entered the conversation yet. Across Manhattan, inside the top-floor office of Whitmore Capital, Grayson Whitmore stood beside a wall of glass overlooking the city. Usually he could focus on numbers, markets, acquisitions. Today he found himself staring at the same security report for the third time. None of it felt right. The evidence appeared straightforward. The diamond had been found in Evelyn's apron. Yet every instinct he possessed continued pushing back. He remembered her expression. Not fear. Not guilt. Confusion. And then that final statement. Whether that stone was ever real to begin with. His assistant entered quietly. Victoria called 3 times. Grayson nodded. I will call her later. She also wants the investigation concluded quickly. That sentence caught his attention. Quickly. Her exact words. The assistant hesitated. She said dragging this out would create unnecessary media attention. Grayson looked back toward the skyline. Strange. Most victims wanted answers. Victoria seemed interested in closure. Meanwhile, several miles away, Evelyn sat alone in a small neighborhood diner. A steaming cup of coffee rested beside her notebook. Rain tapped gently against the window. She flipped through page after page of handwritten observations. Tiny details. Fragments of memory. Moments from the gala. Then she stopped. Her pencil froze. The hallway. Victoria wearing gloves. Evelyn closed her eyes. She replayed the evening carefully. Victoria had worn elegant, white evening gloves for nearly half the event despite being indoors. At the time it seemed like a fashion choice. Now it bothered her. Deeply. She grabbed another sheet of paper and began writing. If someone frequently handled valuable gemstones, gloves could prevent fingerprints. They could also prevent residue transfer. Her pulse quickened. The memory became clearer. Victoria had disappeared into the private hallway shortly before the accusation. Then another detail surfaced. A detail so small most people would never notice it. During one conversation, near the dessert table, Victoria had adjusted the ring twice. Not because it was loose, because she seemed uncomfortable touching it directly. Evelyn stared at the notebook. The pieces did not fit yet, but they were starting to form a shape. An elderly man sitting at the counter noticed her expression. You look like somebody solving a murder mystery. Evelyn laughed softly for the first time in 2 days. I hope it is less dramatic than that. The man grinned. Usually the obvious answer is wrong. That is exactly what worries me. Back at Whitmore Capital, Grayson opened the insurance documents connected to the engagement ring. A routine review. Nothing more. At least that was what he told himself. Then his eyes narrowed. The policy date. He looked again. 3 weeks before the gala. An unusually large insurance policy had been added to the diamond. Grayson leaned back slowly. 3 weeks. Not 3 years. Not 6 months. 3 weeks. Why insure the ring for such a massive amount immediately before it disappeared? Outside, the afternoon sky darkened as storm clouds rolled over the city. Two people sat in different parts of Manhattan asking the same question. One was a billionaire. One was a waitress. Neither knew where the truth would lead. But for the first time since the gala, both were beginning to suspect that the missing diamond was only the beginning of a much larger deception. The next morning began with rain. Thin gray rain that turned Manhattan into a city of blurred lights and reflections. Evelyn Hart sat at a small desk inside her apartment, surrounded by notebooks, library books, and printed articles about gemstones. Most people knew her as a waitress. Few knew that before life had changed course, she had spent 3 years studying gemology at one of the most respected institutes in the country. She had learned how to identify flaws invisible to the human eye. She had learned how light moved through a diamond. She had learned how authenticity left clues. Then her mother became sick. Tuition money became hospital bills. Dreams became responsibilities. And eventually the future she had imagined was replaced by long shifts carrying trays through crowded dining rooms. Evelyn never complained. She simply adapted. But now, sitting beside a rain-streaked window, those years of forgotten study suddenly mattered again. She opened a notebook and sketched the diamond she had seen at the gala. The shape, the proportions, the reflections. Something continued bothering her. Then she reached for a textbook and stopped on a chapter discussing synthetic substitutes and high-end imitations. Her eyes narrowed. During the gala, the stone had reflected light too evenly. Almost perfectly. Real diamonds rarely behave that way. Tiny imperfections were part of what made them valuable. Perfection itself could be suspicious. Meanwhile, across the city, Grayson Whitmore found himself doing something unusual. Instead of preparing for a board meeting, he was reviewing old photographs from the engagement party. Hundreds of images appeared on his screen. Guests smiling. Investors shaking hands. Victoria posing beside floral arrangements. Then he stopped on one photograph. Victoria was speaking with guests while wearing elegant white gloves. Grayson stared at the image. Another photograph. Still wearing gloves. Another. Gloves again. He leaned back slowly. Victoria disliked gloves. She had complained about them repeatedly during winter events. Yet somehow she had worn them for hours that night. His phone buzzed. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. He answered. "Good morning. Have you seen the latest articles?" she asked immediately. People are still discussing her. Grayson knew exactly who she meant. Investigations take time. What investigation? Victoria snapped. The diamond was found in her pocket. Grayson remained silent. Something about the conversation felt rehearsed. Too rehearsed. "Victoria," he said calmly. "Did anyone examine the diamond itself?" Several seconds passed. "Why would they?" "Because that seems important." Her response came too quickly. "The important thing is that it was stolen." After the call ended, Grayson continued staring at the photographs. The feeling returned. The same feeling he had experienced in the ballroom. A detail hidden somewhere beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, Evelyn visited the public library near Bryant Park. She spent hours reviewing auction records, insurance valuations, and gemstone certification databases. Finally, she located information connected to Victoria's engagement ring. The certificate listed dimensions and optical characteristics. Evelyn compared them against her notes from memory. Her heart began beating faster. The measurements did not match what she remembered seeing inside the ballroom. Not even close. She looked again, then again. The more she checked, the more impossible it became to ignore. If her memory was correct, the stone recovered from her apron could not be the same stone described on the certificate. A librarian passing nearby noticed her expression. "You look like you just discovered buried treasure." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe the opposite." "What does that mean?" The waitress looked down at the documents scattered across the table. "Sometimes you spend days looking for something valuable." Her eyes settled on the certification paperwork. "And then you realize the valuable thing disappeared long before anyone noticed." Outside, the rain finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and reflected off the glass towers of Manhattan. For the first time since leaving the gala, Evelyn felt certainty replacing doubt. She still lacked proof. She still lacked answers. But one truth had become impossible to ignore. The diamond everyone was searching for might not have vanished during the engagement party at all. It might have disappeared weeks earlier. And if that was true, then someone had spent a very long time preparing a lie. 3 days later, Evelyn found herself standing in front of a narrow storefront tucked between a bakery and an old tailor shop in Queens. The faded sign above the door read Romano Jewelry and Appraisals. Most people walking past never looked twice at it. That was exactly why she liked it. Inside, shelves overflowed with antique clocks, estate jewelry, and enough dust to qualify as historical preservation. Behind the counter sat Leonard Romano, a 72-year-old gem expert whose opinions were respected throughout the industry and whose sense of humor was respected by absolutely no one. "You look terrible," he said the moment Evelyn walked in. "Good morning to you too." Leonard shrugged. "I am old. I do not have time for unnecessary greetings." Despite herself, Evelyn laughed. Leonard had been one of her instructors years ago. After hearing her story, he had agreed to help. "Tell me everything," he said. Leonard had spent more than 40 years in the gemstone industry. Dealers, appraisers, auction houses, and collectors across the country knew his reputation. Earlier that morning, an old dealer friend from Manhattan had mentioned a recent private purchase involving an unusually large synthetic stone. The detail seemed insignificant at the time. Now it suddenly felt important. For the next hour, Evelyn explained the gala, the insurance policy, the photographs, the gloves, and the certification discrepancies. Leonard listened carefully, occasionally nodding, occasionally grunting, occasionally eating cookies from a tin hidden beneath the counter. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Interesting. That is all?" Evelyn asked. "Interesting. Very interesting." He pointed a cookie at her. "Because if you are right, somebody swapped that diamond long before the party." "Exactly." Leonard smiled. "Then we are not investigating a theft. What are we investigating? A performance." Later that afternoon, Leonard brought her to a luxury gemstone exhibition being held at a convention center on the west side of Manhattan. Collectors, dealers, investors, and jewelers filled the enormous hall. Glass display cases sparkled beneath bright lights. Security guards stood near every entrance. "And how exactly are we getting information here?" Evelyn asked. Leonard handed her a designer handbag. She stared at it. "Why do I need this?" "Because today you are wealthy. I am unemployed." Details. Before she could protest, Leonard adjusted his expensive borrowed jacket and straightened his tie. "Remember, rich people are not smarter. They are simply more confident while being wrong." 20 minutes later, they were walking through the exhibition pretending to be investors searching for rare stones. To Evelyn's surprise, the act worked remarkably well. One dealer spent 15 minutes explaining market trends simply because Leonard repeatedly nodded and said the words portfolio diversification. The dealer happened to be the same long-term industry contact Leonard had spoken with days earlier. Because of that relationship, he was willing to discuss recent market activity more openly than he normally would. Another offered them champagne after assuming they represented a private investment fund. At one point, a salesman proudly presented a collection of synthetic gemstones. Evelyn immediately recognized one particular stone. Her heart skipped. The proportions were nearly identical to the diamond recovered from her apron. She examined it closely. The optical behavior, the symmetry, the reflections, everything matched her memory. Leonard noticed her expression. "You found something." Evelyn nodded slowly. "This material is not uncommon." Meaning somebody could have acquired a replacement without attracting attention. Leonard's eyes brightened. Now we are getting somewhere. Meanwhile, across town, Grayson sat in a conference room pretending to listen to a presentation. Graphs appeared on a screen. Executives discussed quarterly forecasts. Yet his attention remained elsewhere, specifically on a report he had quietly requested that morning. One concerning the insurance policy attached to Victoria's ring. His phone vibrated beneath the table. A message arrived from a private investigator. The policy increase had not been Victoria's only recent financial decision. Several unusual transactions had occurred during the previous month. Large ones. Grayson stared at the screen. The uneasiness returned stronger than ever. Back at the exhibition, Evelyn and Leonard prepared to leave when they overheard two dealers discussing a recent private sale involving an unusually large synthetic stone purchased by an anonymous buyer. The timeline matched perfectly. Leonard slowly smiled. "Well," Evelyn looked at him. "What?" The old jeweler folded his arms. "I think somebody spent a great deal of money creating a fake diamond." He paused. which is ironic because they could have saved money by simply telling the truth. For the first time since the nightmare began, Evelyn felt hope. Small, fragile, but real, because the trail was no longer cold. It was leading somewhere, and every new clue seemed to point toward the same conclusion. Someone had been preparing this deception for weeks, maybe even months. The question was no longer whether a lie existed. The question was who would be brave enough to expose it. The following Monday, Manhattan woke beneath a sky the color of steel. Inside Whitmore Capital, Grayson sat alone in his office long before sunrise. The city lights still glowed beyond the glass walls, but his attention remained fixed on a folder spread across his desk. Bank records, insurance documents, purchase histories. Every new page raised more questions than answers. Victoria had always been careful with money, careful to the point of obsession. Yet over the previous 6 weeks, several transactions stood out. Luxury purchases, private transfers, and one payment connected to a specialty dealer known for handling synthetic gemstones. Grayson stared at the report for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. By noon, he found himself standing outside Romano Jewelry and Appraisals. The decision surprised even him. Billionaires did not normally spend their afternoons visiting tiny shops in Queens. Yet here he was. Inside, Leonard Romano glanced up from a newspaper. "You look expensive," the old jeweler announced. "That is usually a bad sign." Grayson almost smiled. "I am looking for Evelyn Hart." Leonard folded the newspaper carefully. And why would a billionaire be looking for a waitress? Before Grayson could answer, a familiar voice came from the back room. "Because he has questions." Evelyn stepped forward carrying a stack of gemstone catalogs. For a brief moment, neither spoke. This was the first time they had seen each other since the gala. Grayson immediately noticed something. She looked tired. Not defeated, just tired. There was a difference. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said. Evelyn set the catalogs on a counter. "I almost did not." Leonard cleared his throat. "I suddenly need coffee." Neither believed him. The old jeweler disappeared anyway. Silence settled across the shop. Finally, Grayson spoke. "I reviewed the insurance records." Evelyn's expression remained calm. "And you were right to question them." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed her face. Grayson continued. "The timing makes no sense." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I found something too." She showed him copies of certification documents and handwritten notes. Grayson listened carefully as she explained the inconsistencies. The measurements, the optical behavior, the possibility of a substitution. Unlike everyone else at the gala, he did not interrupt her. He simply listened. By the end of the explanation, the room felt different. Not because they agreed on everything, because they were finally examining the same truth. "Why did you stay so calm that night?" Grayson asked unexpectedly. Evelyn looked toward the window. Traffic moved past outside. Life continued as if nothing had happened. Because panic does not help. Most people would have been furious. A faint smile touched her face. "I was furious." Grayson looked surprised. "You hit it well. My mother used to say anger is expensive." "What does that mean?" "It means you pay for it twice. Once when you feel it, and again when you act on it." For the first time in days, Grayson laughed. Not politely, not professionally. A real laugh. Evelyn seemed surprised by the sound herself. Later that afternoon, they compared timelines, photographs, and records. Piece by piece, a clearer picture emerged. By evening, they had reached the same conclusion. Someone had orchestrated the entire event long before the engagement party ever happened. As Grayson prepared to leave, he paused near the door. "There is a charity gala next month." Evelyn frowned. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because Victoria will be there." The shop became quiet again. Outside, headlights reflected off wet pavement. "And?" Evelyn asked. Grayson met her eyes. "And if we are going to uncover the truth, that might be our best opportunity." Evelyn considered the idea carefully. The risk, the attention, the possibility of failure. Then she nodded once. Calmly, confidently. "Then we should be ready." As Grayson stepped back onto the sidewalk, he realized something unexpected. He had come searching for answers. Instead, he found himself admiring the woman everyone else had rushed to judge. And for the first time since the scandal began, he felt something even more powerful than suspicion. Hope. For weeks past, Manhattan decorated itself for the holiday season, while anticipation quietly built around one of the city's largest charity events. The annual Whitmore Foundation Gala attracted celebrities, investors, politicians, and journalists from across the country. Cameras lined the entrance. Luxury cars filled the street. Crystal lights illuminated the grand ballroom. Victoria Hale stood at the center of it all. Elegant, confident, untouchable. At least that was how she appeared. Guests gathered around her as she laughed effortlessly and accepted compliments. The scandal from the engagement party had largely faded from public conversation. Most people assumed the story was over. Most people were wrong. Across the room, Grayson Whitmore greeted donors and board members while carefully observing the crowd. He wore the same calm expression that had made him successful in business. But beneath the surface, he was watching for details. Waiting, listening, looking for the moment when appearances would finally collide with reality. Then the ballroom doors opened. Conversations slowed. Several guests turned. Others froze completely. Evelyn Hart had arrived. She wore a simple navy evening dress borrowed from a friend. No diamonds. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to impress anyone. Yet somehow she attracted more attention than half the room combined. Whispers immediately spread through the crowd. Some recognized her from news articles. Others remembered the engagement party. Victoria noticed her almost instantly. The smile on her face vanished. "What is she doing here?" she asked sharply. One guest shrugged. "I thought she disappeared." Apparently not. Victoria placed her champagne glass down with more force than intended. Meanwhile, Evelyn walked calmly through the ballroom. Every step felt heavier than it appeared. She could feel the eyes following her, judging her, questioning her presence. Yet she remembered her mother's advice. Let the truth do the talking. Grayson crossed the room and met her near the center of the ballroom. "You came." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You sounded surprised." "I know how difficult this must be." "So do I." For a moment neither spoke. The tension that once existed between them had changed. Trust was beginning to replace suspicion. Before either could continue, Victoria approached. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. The surrounding conversations immediately quieted. People sensed drama. Wealthy crowds often did. "This is a private event," Victoria said. "Actually," Grayson replied calmly, "she was invited." Victoria blinked. "By whom?" "By me." The answer landed like a stone dropped into still water. Several nearby guests exchanged glances. Victoria forced a smile. "How generous." Evelyn met her gaze. "Good evening, Victoria." "I cannot say the same." The hostility was obvious. Even Victoria seemed unable to hide it anymore. "Tell me," she continued, folding her arms. "Did you come here hoping people forgot what happened?" Evelyn remained perfectly calm. "No." "Then why are you here?" A small crowd had gathered now. Investors, socialites, reporters, everyone listening. Evelyn looked around the ballroom, then back at Victoria. "I came because some questions were never answered." Victoria laughed softly. "There are no unanswered questions." "I disagree." The room grew quieter. Grayson watched carefully. Victoria's confidence appeared strong, but tiny cracks were beginning to show. "You really cannot let this go, can you?" Victoria asked. Evelyn's voice remained gentle. Truth tends to be persistent. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. A reporter near the back discreetly raised a phone. A representative from the insurance company stepped forward from the crowd. He had been invited to the gala as a donor, but now examined the documents with growing concern. "These findings are serious," he said carefully. "They do not prove fraud by themselves, but they absolutely justify a formal investigation." Several jewelers in attendance quietly reviewed the certification records and reached similar conclusions. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted immediately. This was no longer a personal accusation. It had become a matter for professional investigators. Victoria's smile tightened. "You are embarrassing yourself." "Possibly." Evelyn nodded. "But I am not the one worried." For the first time all evening, genuine concern flashed across Victoria's face. Only for a second. But Grayson saw it. Evelyn saw it. And perhaps most importantly, Victoria realized they had seen it. Then Evelyn reached into her purse and removed a slim folder. Nothing dramatic. Just paper. Documents. Facts. Yet the simple sight of it seemed to drain color from Victoria's expression. Because somewhere deep down, she already knew what was coming next. And for the first time since the deception began, she no longer looked like the person in control. The ballroom felt smaller as silence spread through the crowd. Conversations faded. Music seemed distant. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Everyone was watching Evelyn Hart. She stood calmly beneath the chandelier light, holding nothing more dangerous than a folder filled with documents. Yet somehow she had captured the attention of every powerful person in the room. Victoria forced a laugh. "This is absurd." Her voice sounded sharp now, less confident, less polished. "You think a few papers are going to change anything?" Evelyn opened the folder. "No." She looked directly at Victoria. "Facts will." The room remained silent. Grayson stood nearby, watching carefully. He had already seen most of the evidence. Even so, hearing it publicly would be different. This was the moment. Everything changed. Evelyn removed several photographs and placed them on a nearby table where guests could see them. These were taken during the engagement party. Victoria folded her arms. "And they show you wearing gloves for nearly 4 hours." Victoria rolled her eyes. "That proves nothing." "Correct." Evelyn nodded. "By itself, it proves nothing." She placed another document beside the photographs. "This is the insurance policy purchased 3 weeks before the diamond supposedly disappeared." Several guests leaned closer. A reporter began taking notes. Victoria's smile faded slightly. "People insure jewelry all the time." "They do," Evelyn agreed. "But most people do not dramatically increase the value immediately before a theft." The whispers began, small at first, then louder. Victoria looked toward Grayson. "You cannot seriously be entertaining this." Grayson remained silent. That silence worried her more than any argument could have. Evelyn continued. "Then there is the gemstone certification." She lifted another page. The original diamond was documented with specific dimensions and optical characteristics. Victoria's expression tightened. "Nobody cares about technical details." "Actually," Leonard Romano said from the back of the crowd, suddenly stepping forward, "some of us care very much." Several guests recognized the respected jeweler immediately. The room grew even quieter. Leonard adjusted his glasses and pointed toward the documents. The stone recovered from Miss Hart's apron could not have matched the certified diamond. A reporter raised a hand. "Meaning what exactly?" Leonard smiled faintly. "Meaning they were different stones." The statement landed like thunder. Victoria's face lost color. "That is impossible." "No," Evelyn said softly. "It is measurable." She revealed another set of records. Purchase histories, dealer information, dates, transactions. One by one the pieces connected. The synthetic gemstone, the private purchase, the timing, the insurance increase. Every detail pointed in the same direction. Grayson watched the room slowly realize what he had already begun to suspect weeks earlier. Nobody had stolen a priceless diamond from Victoria that night. The real diamond had vanished long before the engagement party ever happened. "You switched it," Evelyn said quietly. No accusation, no anger, just truth. "At least that is what the evidence suggests," Evelyn added. "The final determination belongs to investigators." Months ago, Victoria stared at her. "You cannot prove that." Evelyn looked toward Leonard. The old jeweler produced a final document. Laboratory analysis, professional verification, independent certification. Everything matched. Everything connected. The synthetic stone recovered from Evelyn's apron was worth a tiny fraction of what Victoria had claimed. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. One guest nearly dropped a champagne glass. Another shook his head in disbelief. A reporter whispered, "My God." Victoria looked around the room desperately. The admiration she once enjoyed had vanished. In its place stood suspicion. Questions. Reality. "You planted it," Evelyn continued. "Then you framed someone you believed nobody would defend." For several seconds Victoria said nothing. Her confidence crumbled visibly. The room waited. Finally she spoke. "You do not understand." Her voice trembled. "I had debts, expectations. Everything was falling apart." Nobody answered. The explanation changed nothing. She had not simply created a lie. She had chosen a target. Someone she thought was powerless. Someone she thought nobody would believe. Evelyn lowered the folder. Her hands remained steady. Her voice remained calm. "That was your mistake." Grayson stepped forward. Not toward Victoria. Toward Evelyn. The gesture did not go unnoticed. Around them, guests began piecing together the entire story. The fake diamond. The insurance scheme. The staged theft. The innocent waitress. And suddenly the woman once blamed by everyone stood as the only person who had told the truth from the very beginning. 11 months later, Winter arrived quietly in Manhattan. Snow dusted the rooftops. Storefront windows glowed with holiday lights. The scandal that had once dominated headlines slowly disappeared from public conversation, replaced by newer stories and newer distractions. But for the people, whose lives had been changed by it, nothing was quite the same. 3 months after the charity gala, Evelyn Hart unlocked the door to her own business for the first time. Hart Gemstone Consulting. The name was painted in elegant silver letters across the front window. Inside, sunlight reflected from display cases and certification equipment. It was not a large office. It was not luxurious, but every inch of it belonged to her. For years she had put aside her dreams. For years she had convinced herself that survival was enough. Now she finally had something she thought she had lost forever. A future. The first customer arrived at 9 o'clock. The second arrived before lunch. By the end of the week, appointments were booked nearly a month in advance. Word traveled quickly in New York, especially when someone built a reputation for honesty. One snowy afternoon, the bell above the door chimed. Evelyn looked up from her desk and smiled. You know, there are easier ways to say hello. Grayson Whitmore stepped inside carrying a small jewelry box. I needed professional advice. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Again. She laughed softly. Over the previous months, these visits had become increasingly common. At first, they discussed documents, investigations, and business opportunities. Then they discussed books, music, family memories, favorite restaurants. Eventually, they stopped needing excuses to spend time together. Somehow, friendship had arrived quietly between them. Neither seemed to notice exactly when. Grayson placed the jewelry box on her desk. What am I looking at today? Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside rested a vintage sapphire ring. She examined it under a magnifying lens. Authentic. Good. That was all. She narrowed her eyes. You absolutely made that up. Grayson smiled. Maybe. The snow continued falling outside. Customers came and went. Hours passed comfortably. The kind of comfort that only exists when two people genuinely enjoy each other's company. Later that evening, they walked through Central Park beneath strings of winter lights. Children laughed near an ice skating rink. Music drifted from nearby speakers. The city felt softer somehow, less rushed, less distant. Can I ask you something? Grayson said. Evelyn looked at him. You usually do. He stopped walking. For the first time in months, he seemed nervous. The realization surprised her. Billionaires were not supposed to look nervous. Yet there he stood, staring at the snow-covered path like a man trying to negotiate with his own thoughts. What is it? She asked gently. Grayson reached into his coat pocket and removed a small velvet box. Evelyn froze, then immediately started laughing. Please tell me you had that professionally inspected first. Grayson laughed too. 3 separate experts. Only 3. I wanted a second opinion. The humor faded into something quieter, something deeper. He opened the box. Inside rested a simple ring. Elegant, understated. No enormous diamond. No attempt to impress anyone. Just honesty. Just intention. Just meaning. I spent most of my life surrounded by people who saw money before they saw me, Grayson said softly. You were the first person who looked past all of it. Evelyn felt her eyes fill with emotion. Not because of the ring, because of the truth behind it. And you were the first person who listened when nobody else did. Snowflakes drifted between them. The city lights shimmered beyond the trees. Everything felt still, peaceful, certain. Evelyn Hart, Grayson said, his voice steady now. Would you marry me? She smiled through tears. Real tears. Happy tears. Then she gave the answer he already knew. Yes. Months later, they exchanged vows beside the ocean surrounded by close friends and family. No headlines. No spectacle. No grand performance. Just 2 people who had found each other through truth. As the sun disappeared beyond the water, Evelyn glanced at the simple ring on her hand and smiled. Because the most valuable thing she gained was never a gemstone. It was the man standing beside her. And sometimes the brightest things in life are not the ones that sparkle. They are the ones that stay. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that truth and dignity always matter, please take a moment to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from, and subscribe to When He Chose Her channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories about courage, kindness, unexpected love, and life-changing moments. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring story. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.